going to do for Fabius Bile is we're going to paint the inside of his cloak, just so we get it out of the way. And we don't have to try and kind of negotiate getting Black Templar all the way in underneath here when we've finally put the armor on, and also just so we don't interfere with the rest of the model. We're not going to do the rest of the black details at this point. We're just going to do the inside of the cape. And the color we're going to use is Black Templar. So we just want to pick a point on the cape to start, and we just want to use nice big broad brush strokes as we do it. And we just want to get a nice thick coat of this that's nice and consistent all the way through. And if you get any on the fleshy part, don't worry, because you can knit back up. But what you don't want to do is get all the outside done and then have to kind of touch it back up and this, that, and the other. So we're just going to, like I say, just do the inside of the cape first. Get it out of the way. With the inside of the cape done, what we can now do is focus on the outside of the cape. And the first colour we're going to be using is Skeleton Horde. Now, helpfully, this cape is all stitched together skin, which is really good for us with contrast, because what we can do is we can paint this a section at a time. So what we can do is we can basically go from recess to recess. So we can start here with the Skeleton Horde and just pull the Skeleton Horde all the way down like that to get a nice, even, thin coat. Like so. And we can just keep going like this. So we just keep going from recess to recess. When you get to the edge like that, you just want to make sure that you pull the paint off rather than finishing with the brush strokes still on the model. And next up, we're going to create a roughly 6:1 mix of contrast medium and FYRESLAYER flesh. And we're going to do a very similar thing to what we've just done. I've actually got too much on my brush there, so I'm just going to take a little bit of that off. And what we're going to do is, much like with the Skeleton Horde, we are just going to very, very gently apply this FYRESLAYER flesh like this, just leaving areas of that Skeleton Horde just shining through on some of the armor panels. Sorry, the fleshy panels. You just kind of want to build up this color very carefully to give you the kind of fades that you can see on the box art. I just want to kind of apply it down here in like the recesses and like this. Just want to keep going around doing it like this with this mix. And next up, we're going to do a very similar thing again with another 6:1 mix of contrast medium, but this time GORE-GRUNTA fur. And you don't want to use a lot of this at once. You want to use a tiny little bit, because this is just how we're just going to apply that really dark kind of shadowy effect that you can see on the box art. And you just want to build this up like this along where that FYRESLAYER flesh is settled, just to create those fades. And once that's dry, we're going to use a bit of thinned down FLAYED flesh just to apply some very gentle highlights to the sharpest areas of this cloak. So things like around here. Like so. And just want to take our time doing this, because there's a lot of these little kind of sharp highlights, particularly around the corsety area. So just take your time and pick out all of these highlights with the FLAYED flesh. And with that done, the flesh cape is now finished. So what we can do is we can move on and paint the rest of the miniature, and we're going to start with the armor. And the color that we're going to use for this is SHYISH purple. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pick an area to start, and I'm going to start down here on the foot, and much like with the cape, I'm just going to make contact with the model. I'm just going to pull it down. I'm just going to use as few brush strokes as I possibly can whilst I do this, to get a nice, smooth, even coverage, like so. And next up, we're going to give all of that purple armor highlight of GENESTEALER purple. With that GENESTEALER purple applied, we're now going to focus on all the black details that we didn't do when we did the inside of the cloak. And these are going to be things like the gloves, the cord holding together his nightmare masterpiece that he's wearing, and some of the various cables, but not all of them. If you want a good record of which ones to check, just check out the box art. So the color we're going to use for this is obviously Black Templar. And we're just going to give it, pick an area to start. And actually, I think I'm going to start with this cable down here. We just want to be very careful as we go near that cape, so as not to get any of this Black Templar all over that. Similarly as well, there's a couple of like joins and casings on the servo arms. So again, just look at your box art for that. But it's things like this little bit here. And next up, we're going to work on all of the gold details. And for this, we're going to be using some thinned down Retributor armor. That is quite a lot of gold trim on the model. So what you want to do is you just want to kind of check out the box art, but it is going to just be mostly things like the shoulder pad trim, the skulls up here, the cane, all those kinds of things. But as I say, just check out the box art. And next up, we're going to paint in all the silver details using some thinned down Iron Warriors. Once all that silver is dry, what we're going to do is we're going to apply some shading. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use two different colors. Now, we're going to use Basilicanum Grey for all of the silver and the gold that are on the mechanical parts. So we're talking mostly around the backpack and things like that. And the Basilicanum Grey is across all of the silver. But for any of the kind of like armor trim and the skull on the cane, we're going to be using a different shade entirely for that. So the first color we're going to use, as I say, is Basilicanum Grey, and this is just going to be for all the silver and gold on the mechanical areas of his backpack and various other areas around him. And once all that Basilicanum Grey is applied, we're going to apply some GUILLIMAN flesh to the remaining gold details. So this should be things like the armor trim, his shoulder pads and on the gloves and on his cane. With those shades applied, before we do any highlights to the metallics, we're just going to colour in the rest of the base colours, and then we'll do highlights on everything in one kind of big section. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to finish off the cane, the base of the cane I should say, and we're going to be using AKHELIAN green for this as our first coat. So we just want to take some AKHELIAN green on our brush, and we just want to make contact with the model somewhere, preferably up here in there, and we just want to pull the paint down in one long brush stroke like so. And sticking with AKHELIAN green, we're going to grab some AETHERMATIC blue, and we're going to paint the cables as well as the vials on here, 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 and these vials here on the weapon. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with AETHERMATIC blue as a coat. So I'll demonstrate this on the cable. So we take the AETHERMATIC blue and we run this blue all over the cable like so. We want to make sure that we get all the way around. In one fell swoop like so. And then, whilst it's still wet, you take a small amount of AKHELIAN green and we just run some of it in certain areas of the cable just to build up a colour. I guess I'll be just using a teeny little bit of it just to build up that kind of fade. Like that. And if you put too much AKHELIAN green on, you can always grab a little bit of AETHERMATIC blue and just where the two colours meet, just kind of smooth out that transition like that. Similarly for the vials, what we do is we take the AETHERMATIC blue and we pick a place to start, and we'll do this one down here. So we put the AETHERMATIC blue all over like so. And then we use the AKHELIAN green once again, whilst it's still wet, just to build up that kind of absence of the liquid. And next up, we want to use a touch of ULTHUAN grey just to apply some kind of light shining effects to all of these vials and these shiny blue cables. So what we do for the cables is we just run a little bit of a highlight running down like this, right down the center of the cable. Like so. And for the vials, what we want to do is we want to add a little bit of ULTHUAN grey that where the two colours meet, just going as a line. And then a couple of these kind of lines just coming down as highlights. Like so. And then lastly, just to finish off these blue vials, we're going to make a roughly 7:1 mix of contrast medium and AKHELIAN green. And we're just going to use this as a glaze just around the middle, all over those ULTHUAN grey highlights. And next up, to finish off the cane, we're going to use a little bit of black TEMPLAR, and we're going to use this on the flats whilst leaving the kind of edges where the AKHELIAN green is shining through as our edge highlight. So we just want to be very controlled as we do this. We don't want to use loads of black TEMPLAR at once. And next up, we're going to use some Apothecary white on all the white details, and this is going to be things like the hair of Fabius himself, and the head on his belt, and of course the tool pouch that he has just down here. We just want to coat this Apothecary white all over. And next up, we're going to use some Basilicanum grey, and this is for the cable that runs along his left side, or his right side, I should say, my left side. You just want a nice smooth grey, so we're not using very much. And we're just using the tip of the brush. And next up, we're going to use some Volupus pink, and this is for the brain thing that's on the back of his backpack in here. But also for where the neck is severed down here. And next up, we're going to use some Gryph-hound orange, and this is for the two remaining vials up here. So we just want to coat this Gryph-hound orange all over. Like this. And then once that Gryph-hound orange is dry, we're going to use a little bit of Volupus pink once more, just to add a little bit of color variation in here. So we just want to use this around the kind of tops of these two little vials like this. And in the tube. And similarly in this one, we're going to kind of about halfway draw a line that goes diagonally across the middle. And next up, just to finish these off, we want to use a hint of Fulgrim pink just where the two colours meet to act as our highlight. Like that. And next up, we want to use a teeny tiny little bit of Blood Angel's red just around the bottom of the orange, just to add a little bit of depth to that colour. And next up, we're going to start highlighting everything before we do the face. And that's going to be our kind of our last stop. And so the first highlights we're going to apply are the silver ones, and we're going to be using some thinned down iron hand steel for this. So we just want to add a little edge highlight of iron hand steel to all of the silver. And next up, we're going to highlight all of the gold with some Liberator gold. And once all that Liberator gold is dry, we're going to use some thinned down Administratum grey to add a small highlight to all of the black details. So this is going to be across things like the knuckles on the gloves, and kind of just a small line going down a little bit of the pipe. Like so. Just want to go around picking out all of these black highlights, and then we'll move on. And with those black highlights applied, we're now going to work on the faces before we do the hair. That way we don't, if we kind of get a little bit of Guilliman flesh on like the roots of the strands of hair, we can just cover over that with a bit of ULTHUAN grey. So the colour we're going to be using is, of course, some Guilliman flesh. And we don't want to use loads of it because we want this to kind of just be quite pale and smooth for both the faces that are present on the model. So like you see, I'm only using a little bit, but you always want to kind of run from a recess to a recess, much like you do with any kind of armor panels. So you just want to like this. You just always want to keep the paint nice and wet. And once that Guilliman flesh is dry, we're going to use some thinned down flayed 1 flesh to apply some highlights to the skin. And next up, we want to use a very, very small amount of Screaming Skull just to colour in the eye. And next we want to use a very small amount of black Templar to paint in the pupil. And last but by no means least, we're going to use some ULTHUAN grey just to pick out the strands of the hair, both on Fabius's head and on the head on his belt. And with that, Fabius Bile is complete. All that's left to do is the base. Or is it? Because in fact, there's his little friend left to do. But you'll be pleased to hear this little friend doesn't take a whole lot to do. So the first thing we're going to do is work on his trousers, and the colour we're going to be using for this is Griff Charger Grey. Now you want to do is you want to pick a place to start, so I'm going to start right here in this nice big deep recess. And much like whenever we paint big grey capes or any kind of cape, we're just going to use big broad brush strokes just to pull that paint out. And once that Griff Charger Grey layer is dry, we're going to add another layer of Griff Charger Grey just to really bring that colour down. And once that's dry, we're going to use a little bit of Basilicanum Grey. And this is just to apply some real shade into these darkest areas. Just want to very carefully do a recess shade of this Basilicanum Grey in all the deep places. And with that done, we can now move on to the top part of his clothes. And for this, we're going to be using some Apothecary White. And in much the same way, we're just going to pick areas to start. And we're just going to use big, broad brush strokes to get a nice, smooth finish on here. So we're just going to paint this Apothecary White, focusing on the darker areas. And once that Apothecary White is dry, we're going to create a really, really thin mix of ULTHUAN grey with some water. And we're just going to, almost like a glaze, just apply this ULTHUAN grey all over this top part of the clothes, like so. The reason it's really thin is just so that we can build it up to the colour that we want it to be, whilst also keeping it nice and smooth, because ULTHUAN grey can be a bit of a pain to work with when it's kind of these large flat areas and you're trying to get them to look white. So we just want to keep going, making sure that we just leave where that Apothecary White has settled, like I've done there. And next up, with that done, we're going to paint in the black of his gas mask using some black Templar. Once that black Templar is dry, we're going to paint in the flesh using some GUILLIMAN flesh. So what we want to do is we want to make contact with the model up here by the fabric, and then just put it down in one long brush stroke. And next up we want to add some flayed one flesh just to the tips and the sharpest edges of all of this flesh. So things like across the knuckles and around the corners of the muscles. And next up, we're going to use some Iron Warriors for all of the metallic silver details. And this is things like the pipe, and the gene seed extractor device thing, and all the plugs, and these little circles, these little rings hanging off the fabric, and up here. And if you need to find any more, just look at the box art. And next up, we're going to paint in all the gold details with some thinned down Retributor armor. And this is going to include areas like the trim around here on the nodules on his back, the inside of this syringe, and some of the workings on the backpack, as well as the chest eagle on the fallen Space Marine, because this guy is going to be an Ultramarine. So you want to do the trim of the shoulder pad as well. Next up, we're going to use some Ultramarines blue to paint in the armor of the fallen Space Marine. And next up, we're going to paint in the black details, including the belt and the soft joins on the Marine's armor. So we just want to use a teeny tiny bit of this black. We just want to very carefully colour this in around all those colours that we've already added. And next up, we're going to paint in the syringe and the progenoid glands. And the first colour we're going to use, particularly for the progenoid glands, is Gryph-hound Orange. So you just want to use a teeny tiny bit of a Gryph-hound Orange. And we just want to paint this over that Retributor armour that we've already added. This will give us a nice kind of shiny, glowy orange effect. Like so. And for the progenoid glands, we want to just colour this in around the top part, like so. And next up, we want to finish off that progenoid gland with a bit of Magos purple. We just want to paint this over the kind of the tail and a bit into that orange that we've already added, just to blend the two colours together, kind of like so. And with that done, we're now going to shade all the silver parts with some Basilicanum grey. And next up, we're going to use some GUILLIMAN flesh just to give all that gold a shade. With those shades applied, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on these little two nodules, and it's much the same application as we did with Fabius himself. We're going to do a coat of AETHERMATIC blue first, followed by some AKHELIAN green shading, just to apply a bit more depth. So we just take a nice brush load of the AETHERMATIC blue and get it all over, like so. And then down the shadowy side, which is just in this case, it's going to go down the left. I'm just going to add a teeny tiny bit of this AKHELIAN green, like so. And you add a little bit to the top. Not that much, that's too much. And next up, we're going to paint in all the soil using some wildwood. And next up, we're going to highlight all of those gold details with some Liberator gold. And next up, we're going to highlight all the silver with some Iron Hand steel. With all those metallics highlighted, we're now going to add the sort of bloods and ichor splatters that you can see on the box art just around his robe and on his legs. And the color we're going to be using for this is Magos Purple. We want to use a small amount, and we just want to kind of add these kind of little, like, just, you almost want to just kind of dab it on like this. You can build up this color in places, but just like kind of do a once over to get it all where you want it to be, and then kind of just go back to it to strengthen that color up in places. So for example, around here, I'm going to grab a little bit more Magos Purple, and I'm just going to do it again over the top in areas like that, just to add a little bit more. And next up, we're going to paint in the eye lenses of the fallen Space Marine, and we're just going to fill the lens socket with some Blood Angels Red, just over the blue, because that's fine, because this is going to present our kind of darker area. And lastly, just to finish off that lens, we're going to draw a little line of Evil Sun Scarlet, just going down the middle of the lens. And with that, both Fabius and his minion are complete. So all that's left to do is do the bases. And, well, the colour I'm going to be using for this is Sterling Battlemire. So I'm going to demonstrate this on Fabius, because we've got a lot more space to work with on him. And we're just going to take this Sterling Battlemire and just apply a nice even coat of it all over the base. And next up, we want to give that base a dry brush of Tyrant's Skull. I've added some tufts to the base, so now all that there is left to do is to apply a couple of coats of black Templar to the rim of the base. And there you have it. Fabius Bile and his little mate are now complete. This was so much fun to do, and I am in deep trouble because now I kind of want to start an Emperor's Children army. Oh well, thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.